what the president's talking about, there's a lot here. I don't believe that Russia is responsible for the stability of food security around the world. I simply don't. Now, granted, yes, Ukraine is a grain country, and they are considered the breadbasket of Europe. From what I understand, they're still able to actually get some things out, particularly after they resecured certain ports and that against Russia. However, they're not the only people that are involved in this. And there are other countries that if they weren't trying to busy, creating nooses for their own agricultural necks, they would be able to step up in this, temporary period of conflict and be able to meet that difference. I mean, one of the things that I have been reading for, Mike Schellenberger has some really good things. There are a number of really good minds on this, that this is literally all they write about. For instance, we've had one of the things that Schellenberger has noted, and I had a book on it actually that I read last year that talked about how we had the John Kerry audio or the story just the other day. He was telling African nations, stop relying on fossil fuel. So you've had people at the World Economic Forum, at the IMF, at the UN, all of these, very, elitist global institutions that have for years been telling poorer nations to stop using fossil fuels and for their citizenry. Haiti did. Sri Lanka did. Look at what was happening in Sri Lanka. There were riots. Look what happened in the Netherlands. You had Dutch farmers that were using their tractors to block roads. There were riots and arrests. I mean, you have people that are on purpose making their energy costs more expensive. And this is all through that ESG. And I've told you this a lot of times before. ESG, that is the environmental, social, and governance standards. I liked it. What did I call it, though? The environmental stupid grifter. Yeah, something like that. You know how China has their behavioral credit system, where if you're good and you love the government, then you get to go places and live your normal life, right? So the ESG thing is pretty much to commerce and agriculture and basically everything else. How that performs in the same way that the behavioral credit scores perform for the communist rulers in Beijing and the Chinese citizenry. And so you have activists, legislators, all of these different regulators. They think that they're all going to get rich off the back of taxpayers because all this stuff gets subsidized by the taxpayers. They say they're going to make the world a better place. They're going to reduce the emissions, the emission rate of fossil fuels, all of this. We have to lower the temperature of the earth, except that's, science is so far away from any kind of consensus on this. It's not even really a legitimate theory. I'm all about absolutely being a good steward, but that's different from this cult. And so what they do is they want to use wind and solar and battery. I was reading a thing, where's this at? I believe it was actually off a Politico piece where it said that offshore wind actually requires 14 times more materials because of the turbines and everything else, and the fiberglass, the cobalt, the REM, rare earth metals, and all of that involved. Solar panels, the same thing. But that's the whole point of this, is that ESG, it's this behavioral standard that they want to use as a way to browbeat people into this. They want to reshape corporate behavior to match that of this political cult. That's, the best way I think to describe it. Because it's all, when you look at their standards and their restrictions, it's all entirely arbitrary. It is an absolutely communist mechanism. So there was a piece, this was over at ESG Analytics, and it discusses where the term came from anyway and the origin and all of this stuff. And it's what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to put this all in an email for you. And I will send this out. It's just going to be short with a bunch of information with this soundbite from Biden. And I'm going to put that all together because I think you need to bookmark it. You're going to be hearing so much about this. And especially as now banks are being pressured by activists to consider ESG scores of entities with whom they work and lend money, etc. So you really need to be aware of this stuff. But these people argue, it's not an actual communist mechanism because the state's taking control. But they're acting as agents of state, which makes it irrelevant. That's an irrelevant point. It's a mashup, and it absolutely incorporates communist structure in order to carry out these goals that they have. So the ESG loans given out by banks and foundations to companies, you have to meet their guidelines. All these businesses have to show that they're pursuing business environments that prioritizes, climate change restrictions and all this other stuff. And they're very highly targeted. All of this. There was from Zero Hedge, a piece that showed ESG assets compounded at 16% between 2014 and 2018. Now they account for 25% of total market assets, and they're trying to make ESG account for 50% of the market share globally by Kane 2024. So this is something you absolutely need to know. This is a leverage. It's a form of leverage that they are using to force compliance. It's extortion, essentially. So there are a lot of companies that are already involved in this. And when you look at all of the effects of it, it affects everything. Everything is affected. It is all part of this move to force compliance and reliance. That's the thing. And so going back to this stuff that he's talking about with food shortages and everything else, I mean, when you have fertilizer artificially restricted, and by that, when you have Dutch farmers told that you have to abandon these ways that have been safe and these ways that you have used for many, many years in order to feed people, you have to basically cut your yield in half, and you have to conform to these ESG standards in order to stay afloat and for banks to continue working with you, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of the reasons why you're seeing these protests and these riots, because when they're unable to fulfill their obligations because of the implementation of ESG standards, then the government's coming in and like, your farm is ours. And that's one of the things you were seeing in Sri Lanka. And they've been and John Kerry is out there trying to pressure African nations to adopt this stuff too. All of this comes together. It's very malicious.